the man sitting across from Oprah Winfrey, existed in three temporal dimensions simultaneously, his consciousness scattered across past, present, and future, like fragments of a shattered mirror, reflecting different moments in time. At 42, Marcus Thompson possessed what neurologists called chronesthesia, a rare condition that prevented him from experiencing time as the linear progression that defines human existence for everyone else. Instead, his mind moved fluidly between yesterday, today, and tomorrow, making every conversation a complex negotiation between what had been, what was, and what would be. His appearance reflected this temporal displacement: prematurely gray hair that seemed to belong to an older man, eyes that held the weariness of someone who had witnessed too much, and hands that moved with the uncertain gestures of someone navigating multiple realities simultaneously. He wore a simple navy sweater and khaki pants, clothing choices that seemed deliberately neutral, as if avoiding anything that might anchor him too firmly to any specific time period or create additional temporal confusion. Marcus held himself with the careful stillness of someone who had learned that sudden movements could trigger disorienting shifts between time frames. Behind wire-rimmed glasses, his brown eyes constantly shifted focus, as if he were seeing not just the Harpo Studios set, but also every other television studio he had ever been in, would ever be in, or might potentially be in. His presence had an otherworldly quality that made other people slightly uncomfortable, as if he were not entirely present in the same moment they were experiencing. The familiar warmth of Harpo Studios buzzed around them, but Marcus experienced it as a layered palimpsest of every television show that had ever been filmed there, every audience that had ever laughed or cried in those seats, every conversation that had ever taken place on that stage. The burgundy and cream color scheme triggered memories of his grandmother's living room from 1987, visions of a future interview he would give in 2031, and simultaneous awareness of the present moment where he sat across from Oprah Winfrey, trying to explain the inexplicable nature of his condition. Oprah Winfrey sat in her signature chair, radiant in a deep purple silk blouse that immediately caused Marcus to experience the color purple across multiple temporal contexts. The lavender dress his daughter would wear to her wedding in 8 years, the bruise on his arm from a fall he had taken last Tuesday, the purple sky he had witnessed during a sunset that wouldn't occur until next month. Her presence filled the studio with authority and warmth. But for Marcus, she existed simultaneously as the media icon she had become, the young television host she had once been, and the elderly wise woman she would eventually become. Today's show was dedicated to Mysteries of the Mind, a special episode highlighting people with unusual neurological conditions that challenged conventional understanding of consciousness, perception, and human experience. The producers had positioned Marcus as someone who had learned to use his unique relationship with time to help others understand the nature of temporal experience and memory formation. But Marcus Thompson carried a secret that would transform this exploration of fascinating neurological differences into something far more complex and disturbing. He had gotten on the show by presenting himself as a researcher studying temporal perception, someone who had found ways to use his chronesthesia to contribute to scientific understanding of how the brain processes time. It wasn't entirely untrue. He had worked with neuroscientists interested in his condition, but the truth was that chronesthesia was not an interesting neurological quirk, but a devastating condition that had destroyed his ability to live a coherent life, maintain relationships, or function in a world built around shared temporal experience. Marcus had first noticed his condition in childhood, though it took years for anyone to understand what was happening to him. While other children lived in the present moment, Marcus found himself constantly experiencing multiple time frames simultaneously. During fourth grade math class, he would simultaneously experience the shame of failing a test that had happened 2 years earlier, the anxiety about a presentation he would give the following week, and the confusion of trying to understand multiplication tables in the present moment. Initially, his parents and teachers assumed he had attention deficit disorder or was simply a daydreamer who struggled to focus on immediate tasks. But as Marcus grew older, the true nature of his condition became apparent. He wasn't just distractible, he was literally experiencing past and future events with the same immediacy and reality as present moments. The condition affected every aspect of Marcus's life in ways that were difficult for others to understand or believe. When he tried to have conversations with people, he would simultaneously hear their current words, remember previous conversations they had shared, and anticipate responses they would give to questions he hadn't yet asked. This made normal social interaction nearly impossible, as Marcus would respond to future comments or reference past conversations that seemed unrelated to what was actually being discussed in the present moment. Romantic relationships were particularly challenging. When Marcus met his future wife Sarah at a college party in 1998, he simultaneously experienced falling in love with her, their wedding day 3 years later, the birth of their daughter in 2005, their divorce proceedings in 2000. The joy of new love was inseparable from the pain of its eventual end, making it impossible for him to be fully present for the actual development of their relationship. Professional life proved equally impossible. Marcus would attend job interviews while simultaneously experiencing his first day of work, conflicts with future colleagues, and the circumstances under which he would eventually be fired or quit. He cycled through dozens of jobs because his temporal displacement made it impossible to focus on immediate tasks when he was equally aware of their long-term consequences and complications. Most devastating was Marcus's relationship with his daughter Emma, born in 2005. When he held her as a newborn, he simultaneously experienced her childhood milestones, her teenage rebellions, her graduation from college, her own future children, and her grief at his eventual death. He couldn't enjoy her childhood innocence because he was simultaneously aware of every mistake he would make as a father, every moment of disappointment she would experience, every way he would fail to be the parent she deserved. The temporal displacement also created a form of psychological torture around traumatic events. When Marcus's father died in a car accident in 2010, he didn't just experience the grief of loss once. He relived the phone call, informing him of the accident, experienced his father's funeral, felt the ongoing sadness of holidays without him, and simultaneously witnessed his father's healthy younger self from years earlier. The past, present, and future of grief existed simultaneously in his consciousness, making it impossible to process or heal from the loss. Marcus had sought help from neurologists, psychiatrists, and researchers interested in temporal perception disorders, but found that traditional therapeutic approaches were useless for someone whose experience of time didn't follow conventional patterns. Cognitive behavioral therapy techniques that relied on distinguishing between past thoughts and present reality were meaningless when past, present, and future thoughts existed with equal immediacy and authority. In his consciousness, the condition had also given Marcus an unusual and disturbing ability that he had never discussed publicly. He could occasionally predict future events with remarkable accuracy, not through any mystical or supernatural means, but because his mind sometimes accessed future temporal experiences as readily as it accessed past ones. He had correctly predicted minor events, stock market fluctuations, weather patterns, sports outcomes, with enough frequency to convince himself and a few close observers that his temporal displacement sometimes included genuine precognitive elements. But this ability only added to Marcus's isolation and distress, knowing that certain negative events would occur, but being unable to prevent them, or knowing positive developments that wouldn't happen for years while struggling with present difficulties, created additional layers of psychological burden that made normal emotional regulation impossible. That's what had brought him to Oprah's show today. After years of trying to manage his condition privately, Marcus felt compelled to share his experience publicly, both to help other people understand the hidden costs of temporal displacement and to demonstrate the reality of his condition through the precognitive abilities that sometimes accompanied his chronesthesia. The show's opening segments had featured fascinating neurological cases. A woman with synesthesia who experienced numbers as colors and created mathematical art. A man whose brain injury had given him perfect pitch and the ability to compose complex symphonies, and a teenager whose autism included extraordinary pattern recognition abilities that helped solve complex computational problems. Each story was inspiring, each guest demonstrating how neurological differences could become sources of remarkable human achievement. But when Oprah introduced Marcus, something in her expression suggested she sensed this conversation might be different. "Ladies and gentlemen," Oprah announced, "I want you to meet Marcus Thompson. Marcus has a rare neurological condition called chronesthesia, which affects how his brain processes temporal experience. Today, he's here to help us understand what it means to experience time differently, and how his unique perspective on past, present, and future has contributed to research about human consciousness and memory." Marcus stood carefully, his movement betraying the disorientation of someone navigating multiple temporal frameworks simultaneously. As he walked to the interview area, he felt not just the weight of 300 current audience members watching him, but also the scrutiny of every audience he had ever faced and would ever face in similar situations. As they settled into their chairs, Oprah noticed the way Marcus seemed to be listening to something beyond their immediate conversation. His attention divided between the present moment and something else that only he could perceive. "Marcus," Oprah began warmly, "most of us experience time as a straight line past, present, future happening in sequence. Tell us what it's like to experience time differently." Marcus had prepared explanations about the fascinating aspects of temporal displacement, the research applications, the unique insights his condition provided. But sitting across from Oprah Winfrey, simultaneously experiencing this conversation, similar conversations from his past, and conversations he would have in the future, the prepared responses felt inadequate to convey the true nature of his experience. "Oprah," he began, his voice carrying an odd quality as if he were responding to multiple conversations simultaneously. "Imagine if every moment of your life, every joy, every tragedy, every mundane Tuesday afternoon was happening right now, all at once, with equal reality and immediacy." He paused, his eyes focusing on something beyond the immediate studio. "As I'm talking to you now, I'm simultaneously experiencing my father's funeral in 2010, my daughter's birth in 2005, and a conversation we haven't had yet, but will have in about 23 minutes, where you ask me about my relationship with Sarah." The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to process someone discussing future conversations, as if they had already occurred. "Are you saying you can see the future?" Oprah asked gently. Marcus's expression grew pained as he tried to explain the unexplainable. "Not see the future exactly," he said. "It's more like, you know how you can remember what you had for breakfast this morning? For me, future events sometimes exist in my consciousness, with the same reality and accessibility as past memories. I don't control it, and I can't summon it at will, but sometimes tomorrow feels as real and immediate as yesterday." He looked directly at Oprah. "Right now, I'm experiencing this conversation, but I'm also experiencing the moment, 15 years ago, when I first realized my time perception was different from other people's, and I'm simultaneously aware that in 6 years, I'll be sitting in a different chair in a different studio, talking to a different host about research that will be conducted based on this interview." The studio fell into an unexpected silence as people tried to comprehend what Marcus was describing. "Marcus," Oprah said softly, "how does experiencing time this way affect your daily life?" Marcus's voice took on the exhausted quality of someone who had tried countless times to explain an inexplicable burden. It makes normal life impossible, he admitted. I can't have a conversation with my daughter about her current boyfriend because I'm simultaneously experiencing every relationship she'll ever have. I can't enjoy a beautiful sunset because I'm also experiencing every sunset I've ever seen and every one I'll see in the future, including the last one before I die. His voice grew more intense. I can't form new relationships because I experience people's entire life stories, past and future. From the moment I meet them, I know how every friendship will end. Every romance will disappoint. Every professional relationship will become complicated. I can't be present for the joy of new connections because I'm simultaneously experiencing their inevitable conclusions. The audience was completely silent now, beginning to understand that they were witnessing someone describe a form of existence that was fundamentally different from human temporal experience. But surely, Oprah pressed, there must be some advantages to your unique perspective on time. Marcus's laugh was bitter, tinged with years of trying to find meaning in his condition. People think that knowing the future would be wonderful, he said. But imagine knowing that your father will die in a car accident 5 years before it happens, but being unable to prevent it because you also know that your attempts to warn him will fail. Imagine experiencing your own death simultaneously with your birth, so that every moment of life is shadowed by knowledge of its ending. He paused, his voice becoming quieter. I know things that haven't happened yet, but I can't change them. I experience joy from the past while simultaneously feeling sadness from the future. I exist in all temporal moments at once, which means I never truly exist in any single moment. I'm constantly displaced from the present, which is the only time when life actually happens. Oprah was visibly moved by Marcus's description of temporal exile. Marcus, can you give us a specific example of how your chronesthesia manifests? Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with the look of someone accessing information from multiple time frames. 3 days ago, I was walking past a coffee shop and smelled fresh pastries, he began. But I didn't just experience that pleasant moment. I simultaneously relived my 10th birthday when my mother made cinnamon rolls, experienced the grief I felt at her funeral, and saw myself visiting that same coffee shop next Tuesday when I'll receive a phone call about a job opportunity that I know I won't take because I can also see how that job will end in frustration. 18 months later, his voice grew more urgent. That's what every moment is like, a cascade of temporal experiences that make it impossible to simply enjoy smelling fresh pastries on a Tuesday afternoon. I can't live in the present because I'm always experiencing the past and future simultaneously. That's when Marcus did something that surprised everyone in the studio. He looked directly at Oprah and said, in 17 minutes, you're going to ask me about my divorce from Sarah, and I'm going to tell you about the day in 2008 when I knew our marriage would end even though we had just gotten engaged. Oprah glanced at her notes, confused. Marcus, I don't have any questions about your divorce. I wasn't even aware that you had been married. Marcus smiled sadly. You will. When we reach the segment about how my condition affects relationships, you'll ask about my marriage. And I'll tell you that I experienced our entire relationship. The good years, the growing distance, the arguments, the lawyers, the custody arrangements on the night I proposed to her. The audience murmured uncomfortably, unsure whether Marcus was demonstrating his condition or having some kind of psychological episode. But you're also going to ask me something else, Marcus continued, his voice taking on an eerie certainty. After I finish explaining about Sarah, you're going to ask me if I can predict something that will happen during this show. And I'm going to tell you that during the commercial break before the final segment, someone in the audience, the woman in the red sweater, third row, seat 7, is going to receive a phone call telling her that her sister has gone into labor 3 weeks early with her first child. Everyone turned to look at the woman Marcus had indicated, a middle-aged woman in a red sweater, who was staring at him with complete bewilderment. "That's impossible," the woman called out. "My sister isn't even pregnant." Marcus looked at her with gentle sadness. "She doesn't know yet. She'll find out tomorrow when she goes to the doctor about what she thinks is stomach flu. But the baby is coming early, and you'll get the call during our commercial break. At approximately the woman looked terrified, clutching her phone as if it might ring at any moment. Oprah was visibly shaken by the specificity of Marcus's prediction. "Marcus, how can you possibly know something like that?" "Because for me, it's not prediction," Marcus explained. "It's memory. I remember that phone call the same way you remember what you had for breakfast. The fact that it hasn't happened yet, in linear time, doesn't make it less real or immediate in my temporal experience." The studio buzzed with nervous energy as everyone wondered whether they were witnessing an extraordinary neurological condition or an elaborate psychological manipulation. "Let me show you something else," Marcus said, standing up and walking to the whiteboard that had been set up for another segment. He began writing rapidly, covering the board with dates, times, and brief descriptions. March 15, 2023, 2:17 p.m. I will trip on the sidewalk outside my apartment and scrape my knee. June 8, 2024, 9:33 a.m. I will receive an email offering me a position at Northwestern University that I will decline. November 21, 25, 4:45 p.m. I will have dinner with Emma at the restaurant where Sarah and I had our first date, and I will finally understand why my marriage failed. He continued writing, filling the board with dozens of specific future events, each dated and timed with precision. "These aren't predictions," he said, turning back to face the audience. "These are memories of experiences I haven't had yet in linear time. I remember them with the same clarity and certainty that you remember yesterday's conversations." The audience was stunned, watching someone demonstrate a form of consciousness that challenged everything they understood about human temporal experience. At exactly 3:47 p.m., during the commercial break, the woman in the red sweater's phone rang. The studio fell completely silent as she answered. "Hello? What? She's what? But she's not. Oh my God. Yes, I'll be right there." She hung up, her face pale with shock, and looked directly at Marcus. "My sister just called," she announced to the studio. "She's at the hospital. She found out this morning that she's pregnant, and she's in labor. The baby is coming 6 weeks early." The audience erupted in stunned murmurs. Oprah stared at Marcus with a mixture of awe and concern. "Marcus," she said slowly, "how did you know?" Marcus returned to his chair, looking more exhausted than vindicated. "Because I was there," he said simply. "In my temporal experience, I was in this studio when she received that call, just as I'm here now, just as I was here yesterday in my memory of this conversation. Time isn't linear for me. It's all happening simultaneously." Oprah was openly crying now, understanding that she was witnessing something that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness, time, and human experience. "Marcus, what do you want people to understand about living with chronesthesia?" Marcus looked directly at the camera, speaking to millions of viewers who existed for him across multiple temporal dimensions. "I want them to understand that existing outside normal time isn't a gift, it's exile," he said. "Linear time, the present moment, the ability to experience joy without simultaneously experiencing its ending. Those aren't limitations, they're what make life livable." His voice grew more passionate. "The present moment is precious precisely because it's temporary, because it exists between past and future, without being overwhelmed by them. I would give anything to experience one moment, just one, without also experiencing every related moment from my past and future. I would trade all my knowledge of what's coming for the ability to be surprised by a sunset, to fall in love without knowing how it ends, to live in the beautiful uncertainty that makes each moment meaningful. As the show concluded, Marcus Thompson stood and embraced Oprah with the presence of someone who existed simultaneously in multiple time frames, who had experienced this embrace in the past, was experiencing it in the present, and had already experienced it in the future. The man who could remember tomorrow had learned that some gifts are actually forms of exile, that some extraordinary abilities come at the cost of ordinary human experience. In the months that followed, Marcus's interview sparked intensive research into chronesthesia and temporal displacement disorders. His predictions continued to prove accurate with disturbing frequency, leading to collaborations with neuroscientists studying the relationship between consciousness and temporal perception. But Marcus himself found little comfort in the scientific interest his condition generated. He continued to exist, displaced from the present moment, carrying the weight of experiencing all time simultaneously, unable to live in the beautiful, limited, precious present that defines human existence for everyone else. The interview became a touchstone for discussions about consciousness, time, and the nature of human experience. It reminded viewers that the linear progression of time past, present, future, experienced in sequence, is not a limitation, but a fundamental aspect of what makes human life comprehensible, relationships possible, and individual moments meaningful. Marcus learned that being unstuck in time was not freedom, but imprisonment, that knowing the future was not power, but burden, and that the greatest gift of human consciousness was not the ability to transcend temporal limitations, but the capacity to live fully within them. The time traveler's regret was not about missed opportunities or roads not taken, but about the loss of the present moment, the only time when life actually happens, when love can be felt without knowing its ending, when joy can be experienced without being shadowed by its eventual conclusion. Because sometimes the most extraordinary abilities serve only to reveal how extraordinary ordinary human experience actually is, how precious the limitations that make meaning possible, how beautiful the boundaries that allow us to live one moment at a time.